Hi, this is Kendall Boyson, professional life and recovery coach, and you're listening to Encouragementology, the practice of instilling hope. Hi there. Thanks for joining me. On this show, we're going to slow down and spend some time with something we all carry, whether we admit it out loud or not: stress. Not just the obvious stress, not just the big, unavoidable stuff, but the quieter kind. The pressure we put on ourselves. The expectations we quietly stack on the moments, conversations, and people we care about, hoping it will all somehow come together just right. Have you ever walked into something already feeling tense? Not because anything was wrong yet, but because you really wanted it to go well. You wanted it to matter. You wanted everyone to feel good. You wanted it to mean something. And somewhere in all that wanting, the stress showed up first. What's interesting is how often we think stress is coming from what's happening around us, when in reality, it's coming from what we're asking of ourselves inside the moment. The invisible rules we create, the standards we assume we have to meet, the idea that if it isn't done perfectly, it somehow doesn't count. Today, I don't want to talk about how to get rid of stress. That usually just creates more stress. Instead, I want to talk about how to get through it, how we move with it instead of fighting it. Because the truth is, stress doesn't always mean something is wrong. Sometimes it means something matters deeply to us. But here's where it gets tricky. When caring turns into pressure, when effort turns into self-judgment, when we start believing that what we give is never quite enough. I want to explore the difference between the stress that finds us and the stress we create. Why we push ourselves so hard to get it right. Where that pressure comes from, and how we can begin to build a gentler, steadier practice of reminding ourselves again and again that we are already enough. Not when everything is perfect, not when we've shown up at our best, but right here, in the middle of trying, in the middle of effort, and in the middle of real life. So settle in with me, take a breath. Let's talk about stress and what it might look like to get over it by getting through it. Let's start by getting really honest about what we mean when we say the word stress, because we tend to talk about it like it's one thing. It's not. Some stress shows up whether we want it or not. Life changes, health issues, tough conversations, unexpected responsibilities. That kind of stress finds us. We don't invite it, and we don't get a vote. But there's another kind of stress that doesn't just show up. We build it. This is the stress that comes from expectations, from the quiet pressure to get it right, to make it meaningful, to make sure everyone feels good, to not mess it up. It's stress that whispers, if I'm going to do this, it better be worth it. And here's the part we don't always notice. That stress often shows up before anything even happens. Before the conversation, before the gathering, before the decision. We're already carrying around the weight of how we think it's supposed to go. We do this because we care, because connection matters to us, because we want to be thoughtful and intentional. There's nothing wrong with that. But somewhere along the way, caring turns into pressure, and pressure turns into self-judgment. We start measuring the moment instead of living in it. We tell ourselves stories like, this has to be perfect, or I can't disappoint anyone, or if I don't show up at my best, it doesn't count. And suddenly, something that could have been meaningful becomes heavy. What's interesting is how personal this pressure feels, even though it's often learned. Many of us were taught directly or indirectly that effort equals worth, that doing more means being more, that showing up tired, distracted, or less than polished is somehow a failure. So when our energy is low or our capacity is stretched, we don't adjust our expectations. We criticize ourselves instead. And that's where stress stops being about the situation and starts being about our relationship with ourselves. The question I want to leave you with here isn't how do we avoid stress, because that's not realistic. The better question is, what kind of stress am I carrying right now? The kind that life handed me, or the kind I handed myself? That awareness is where real change begins. Let's widen this conversation a bit, because when we're stressed, it can feel incredibly personal, like something is wrong with us. But this is something humans have been wrestling with for a very long time. One perspective I love comes from Don Miguel Ruiz and the Four Agreements. I know I mention this book all the time, and in it, he talks about the idea of doing your best, but he reframes what your best actually means. Your best isn't a fixed number. It changes depending on the day, the moment, and what life is asking of you. If you have a lot of energy and clarity, your best might look strong and confident. If you're tired, overwhelmed, or stretched thin, your best might look quieter, slower, or smaller. And that doesn't make it less valuable. Ruiz says that when you truly do your best, you avoid self-judgment because you know you gave what you had to give, not what you wish you had, not what you think you should have, what you actually had. That idea alone challenges so much of the pressure we put on ourselves. We often hold today to the standard of yesterday, or even to some ideal version of ourselves that doesn't really exist in real life. Another insight comes from psychology around perfectionism. Studies constantly show that perfectionism isn't about high standards as much as it is about fear. Fear of disappointing others, fear of being judged, fear of not being enough. What's interesting is that many people who struggle with perfectionism aren't responding to external demands at all. They're responding to internal ones. The pressure is coming from the inside, not the outside. And then I love this line from Brené Brown that really lands. She says that perfectionism is not the same thing as striving for excellence. Perfectionism is the belief that if we do everything perfectly, we can avoid pain, blame, or criticism. In other words, it's a form of armor, and armor is heavy. When you start looking at stress through this lens, it shifts things. Stress becomes less about time management and more about self-relationship. Less about what you're doing and more about how you're treating yourself while you do it. We're not just stressed because life is full. We're stressed because we believe we're supposed to be more than human while living it. And maybe the work isn't to push harder, but to question the rules we're playing by in the first place. Let's slow this down and make it personal for a moment. I want you to think about something in your life right now that feels stressful. Not the biggest, scariest thing, just something that has a little weight to it. Something you catch yourself thinking about when you're not busy. Got it? Now, here's the part we don't usually do. Instead of asking, how do I fix this? I want you to ask a different question. What am I expecting from myself here? Because most of the time, the stress isn't coming from the thing itself. It's coming from the expectations sitting on top of it. So let's gently unpack that. If you're comfortable, imagine that expectation as a sentence. Maybe it sounds like, I need to make everyone happy, or I can't mess this up, or this has to be meaningful. Just notice what comes up. Now ask yourself, where did that rule come from? Did someone actually say it out loud? Or did you quietly decide this is what's required to be good or thoughtful or enough? Here's another question that often stops people in their tracks. What would happen if you lowered that expectation by just 10%? Not abandoned it, not gave up, just loosened it a little. Would the situation fall apart? Or would you be able to breathe again? We tend to believe that pressure is what keeps us from failing. But sometimes pressure is the very thing stealing our presence. And without presence, even the most meaningful moments can feel hollow. As you sit with this, pay attention to your body. Stress usually shows up physically before it even turns into a thought. Tight shoulders, shallow breathing, clenching your jaw. Those are signals, not flaws. They're invitations to pause and ask, what am I asking myself right now? And is it reasonable? Again, this isn't about lowering your standards. It's about aligning them with reality, with humanity, with the truth that you are allowed to show up as you are, not as a perfect managed version of yourself. If nothing else, let this be a small experiment. The next time stress rises, don't rush to push through it. Get curious about it. See if there's an expectation you can set down. Sometimes getting through stress starts with loosening your grip. Now that we've slowed this down and taken a closer look at where stress comes from, let's talk about what you can actually do with this awareness. Not a complete life overhaul. Nobody's got time for that. Just a few small shifts that can make stress feel less consuming and more manageable. The first is to separate effort from outcome. We often judge ourselves based on how things turned out, not how we showed up. But outcomes depend on a lot of things that are outside of our control. Other people's moods, timing, energy, circumstances. Effort, on the other hand, is something you do control. When you start measuring your day by effort instead of results, stress softens. You can honestly say, I showed up with what I had, and let that be enough. The second shift is to redefine your best in real time. Instead of asking, what should I be able to do right now? Try asking, what do I realistically have to give today? Those are two very different questions. This is where Don Miguel Ruiz's perspective really comes to life. Giving your best does mean giving everything, but it also means what's available without beating yourself up for what's not. The third shift in this practice is lowering the bar without lowering your values. Lowering the bar doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding perfection. You can still value connection, honesty, and effort without insisting that every moment be flawless or deeply meaningful. Sometimes the most meaningful thing you can bring into a space is your presence, not your performance. And the fourth shift is to build a pause into moments of pressure. When you feel yourself rushing, tightening, or spiraling, pause long enough to ask, what am I trying to prove right now? That question has a way of interrupting the stress cycle and bringing you back to what actually matters. These aren't dramatic changes. They're quiet ones. But quiet changes tend to stick. And over time, they create a different relationship with stress. One where you're not fighting it, but moving through it with a little more grace and self-trust. The A side is the familiar story we all know, but the B side, that's where the deeper tracks live. The A side of stress tells us that stress is something to eliminate, to manage, to conquer. If we were more organized or disciplined, more put together, we wouldn't feel this way. But the B side tells a different story. The B side suggests that stress isn't always a sign that something is wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that something matters, that you care deeply, that you're invested, that you want to do right by the people and the moments in your life. The problem isn't that you care. The problem is when caring turns into carrying more than you were meant to hold. The A side says, push through it. The B side asks, what if listening is more helpful than pushing? Listening to your body when it tightens. Listening to your mind when it starts piling on rules. Listening to the part of you that's quietly saying, this is too much right now. Here's the deeper track most of us don't hear often enough. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to justify ease. And you don't have to suffer to prove that something mattered to you. Stress doesn't disappear when you try harder. It softens when you allow yourself to be human inside the moment instead of perfect. The B side invites us to trade self-judgment for self-trust, to believe that even when we don't show up at our strongest, we're still showing up in a way that counts. And when you start living from that place, stress loosens some of its grip. Not because life gets easier, but because you stop fighting yourself while you're in it. I want to share a simple story with you. There was a woman who loved hosting family gatherings. She cared deeply about making people feel welcome. So every time she hosted, she planned everything down to the smallest detail. The food had to be just right. The conversations had to flow. Everyone had to leave feeling happy and connected. But every time the gathering ended, she felt exhausted and strangely disappointed. Not because anything went wrong, but because it never felt like enough. One day, a close friend pulled her aside and asked, "Did you enjoy yourself today?" The woman paused. She honestly didn't know how to answer. She had been so focused on making the moment meaningful that she never actually experienced it. The next time she hosted, she made a quiet decision. She still prepared, she still cared, but she let go of the idea that the moment had to be perfect. She allowed silence. She let conversations wander. She noticed when she felt tense and softened instead of pushing through. And something unexpected happened. People lingered longer. Laughter came more easily. The connection felt real instead of orchestrated. The moral of the story isn't that effort doesn't matter. It's that presence matters more. When we stop trying to control the meaning of the moment, we finally get to be a part of it. Sometimes the stress isn't asking us to do less. It's asking us to let go. This is a good place to pause and turn the focus inward. No overthinking, just notice what comes up. Sometimes the first honest answer is the one that matters most. Feel free to grab your journal or just relax and reflect. One, where am I creating pressure that doesn't actually need to be there? What expectations have I placed on myself in this situation? Did I choose these expectations, or did I inherit them from someone else? What would change if I softened one of them, even just a little? 2, what does doing my best look like for me right now? What do I realistically have the energy, time, and emotional space to give? How do I usually judge myself when my capacity is lower than I want it to be? What would self-respect look like instead of self-criticism? 3, where do I need to remind myself that I am already enough? In which moments do I feel the urge to prove myself? What am I afraid would happen if I stopped trying so hard? How might my stress shift if I trusted that my presence is enough? You don't need to solve any of this today. Awareness is the work. Compassion is the practice, and both take time. Before we wrap this up, I want to pause for just a moment and remind you that if this conversation stirred something in you, you don't have to rush past it. I've created a 5-day journaling companion that walks alongside this episode, not to give you more to do, but to give you a little more space to process. Each day builds gently on the next, helping you explore where pressure shows up in your life, how you define your best, and what it looks like to truly believe you're enough. You don't need to complete it perfectly or all at once. Even one day, one question, one honest moment can shift how you move through stress. And with that in mind, let's pull together what really matters from today's conversation. First, stress isn't always a sign that something is wrong. Often, it's a sign that something matters to you. The problem isn't caring. It's when caring turns into pressure, and pressure turns into self-judgment. Second, not all stress comes from life. Sometimes it comes from the expectations we place on ourselves. When you learn to tell the difference between stress that finds you and stress you create, you gain back a sense of choice. Third, doing your best means giving what you have on the day you're in. When your capacity is low, honoring that is not quitting, it's wisdom. Fourth, meaning doesn't require perfection. Presence matters more than performance. The moments that stay with us are rarely the polished ones. They're the honest ones. And finally, stress softens when you stop fighting yourself, when you replace self-criticism with curiosity, when you allow yourself to be human instead of ideal. As you move forward, notice where you can loosen your grip just enough to breathe, where you can lower the bar without lowering your values, where you can remind yourself quietly and consistently that you are already enough. If you want to share encouragementology with a friend who needs to know they're not alone in this journey of self-discovery, you can visit encouragementology.com or anywhere you stream your content to receive this episode and all others. Check out the show notes for the 5-day journaling companion and follow us on Facebook and Instagram for additional encouragement throughout the week. So I challenge you. Notice one place this week where you're putting unnecessary pressure on yourself. Pause long enough to ask what you actually have to give, and then give that fully, without apology or self-judgment. Let that be enough. I know you can do it. Thank you for listening to Encouragementology with Kendall Boyson, where we find positive ways to handle some of life's challenges.
I stumbled through until the path was clear. That's when I found you and how I wound up here. All I needed was a rock that I could lean on. All you needed was some wind beneath your wings. We might be seeing things from different points of view, but that don't mean a thing. You and I, we were meant to be. I was made for you, you were made for me. So let it happen naturally. Things will work out fine, just you wait and see. Oh, you sat across my lap one summer night. There was only one star out, but it was shining bright. So I held you in my arms with all my might. It felt good to be in love again. I didn't want that night to end, but all I needed was a little motivation. All you needed was a light to guide the way. We might disagree until we drive each other crazy, but things should be okay. You and I, we were meant to be. I was made for you, you were made for me. So let it happen naturally. Things will work out fine, just you wait and see. I have never felt this way before. Every time you leave, you always leave me wanting more. It wasn't long before I knew that no one else would ever do. I only hope you feel it too. I loved you on a Monday afternoon when you caught me staring at you from across the room. There was only one star out that night, but I made a wish for you, and I hope that